Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 11th, 2019. That makes it Veterans Day. And, well, this is it. We're on it. So we should take the day off, I think, right? Okay, so thanks, everybody. This has been a great show. I guess I should be off somewhere. It's a government holiday and a bank holiday, I suppose, but not a holiday everywhere. The kids are in school. They gave them, of course, an extra day off around Election Day, as it happens, and I think an excellent practice here in our county. Although, I guess for some people it would create, of course, childcare problems, but then you could take your kids with you to vote, possibly, if you had to take the day off. There's pluses and minuses to it. We should be switching, of course, to some sort of much more inclusive system where everybody gets a chance to vote and doesn't miss any work. But short of that, I guess if you were of the election day ought to be a holiday persuasion, then taking about a quarter of the step of the way there is a good idea. Of course, it's actually just done for security reasons here. A lot of the polling places around here are in the public schools, and they don't want to just have people having unfettered access in and out of the public schools during the school day, so they just close them and have the teacher work day on Monday, and probably on Tuesday, too. I guess they don't mind people walking in and out with unfettered access to teachers. To hell with them. But okay. Anyway, that's what we've got going on today. That just means for us, light traffic around town, easier commute if you have to make your way to work today, and plenty of time for us to wrap things up and bring you news from over the weekend. Greg Dworkin has a raft of stories ready to go. We can take a look at those. He'll be here shortly to discuss some of those. And how do we do for the weekend? I think we gave you a pretty good send-off on Friday. Gave you a good tip on a story that, well, I wasn't sure it would explode over the weekend. A different angle on it exploded over the weekend. So I'm feeling, relatively good about having sent you off with the story that we made at least some mention of on Friday. The weird story of the guy, the guy who fronted Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman $500,000 to pay Rudy Giuliani with for no apparent reason. No one could figure out exactly why this person had done it and who this person was. But, now I can't remember. What is his last name? He's Charles Gucciardo. Do I have the name correct? I think we do. We'll have to talk about him today. His name came up last week in one of the articles that we read, just as the mystery guy who fronted the money for whatever it was that Parnas and Fruman were hiring Giuliani for. It's not, even that is still not clear. So we got his name on the record before a weird story developed over the weekend involving this guy and connecting him to another story that we had read earlier and puzzled over. I don't know, did we read the whole story? I know we made mention finally of the story, the weird one where Giuliani allegedly butt dials a reporter and leaves a voicemail, a cryptic voicemail, including half of a conversation that I guess we're supposed to believe Giuliani didn't know was being recorded. May actually be the case. And at first it was a sort of a humorous story that may have a serious element. There was the humorous story that here was Giuliani, President Trump's cybersecurity advisor, and a guy with a high-dollar consultancy in security, including cybersecurity, who repeatedly had technological gaffes, butt dialing reporters for one, locking himself out of his iPhone by forgetting his password, such that he had to go to the Apple Store Genius Bar to get his phone restored, and more, and including this story which developed over the weekend that began with what was supposed to look like Giuliani inadvertently texting a password of some kind, whether it was his email or his, I don't know, his bank, who knows what it was supposed to be a password for, to a reporter that he was in casual contact with. And then insisting that that too had been a butt dial, despite the fact that the reporter had actually ruled that out. Should we take a look at that? We'll take maybe a few minutes to start talking about that one, just because it's a place to start for the weekend. And Greg's still organizing some stories around there. Maybe still having meetings with the Masonic Guild that is holding meetings in his home, apparently. Take a look at this thing. It's in Salon. Roger Sullenberger is the writer. Oh, Greg is ready here. So I'm sure we'll talk about this as part of the roundup, but I'll certainly get to it later. It's a must-do follow-up. So, all right, let's start with Greg. Have the secret order of stonemasons adjourned for the day?
It's Veterans Day, so it's going to be a skeleton crew, as they say, which is appropriate around Halloween.
Okay, yes.
But they're still doing more work. We're having some stonework and walkways redone around the house, so it gets a little noisy. And this is about the time that I have to go out and. So what are we doing today, and where do you want to put the dirt, and what's going on, and did the delivery come, and give me my money, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the pleasant part. Okay.
Yeah, so it's fun. It's when you're the supervising. What did they call it in Reagan's day? The supervising authority, or whatever it is.
No, or maybe you're
Alexander Haig's.
Okay. You're in charge at the White House. I was going to say maybe there's no controlling legal authority from the Gore days.
We go. that one too. But okay. Either way.
Yes.
Either way, that's what's going on. So the big story this week,
from
really.
Your perspective, yes.
I mean, you could look at the Democratic primaries and the non-issue of Bloomberg's entry. Maybe we'll get to that. But the big story, of course, is that the public impeachment hearings are going to start on Wednesday.
All right, that's true. That is happening later on.
Right, and so let's give you some good stuff about that. This is from Jonathan Bernstein in Bloomberg Opinion. Jonathan Bernstein is a political scientist I follow. Very good. What's the real goal of impeachment hearings? As the House begins public hearings this week, it helps to think about the intended audience.
Okay.
All right.
Who's
I might even comment that in the pundit roundup today, I picked up something that John Harwood had said. He was retweeting a Bill Moyers tweet, and the fact of the matter is that facts, in fact, matter.
Facts, in fact.
Right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea, you'll hear from the cynics, is that, they're going to do a whole bunch of weird stuff. Harwood wrote, emerging Republican approach portrays Rudy Giuliani as working in his own interest, not Trump. Sondland, Ambassador Sondland of the EU, was a braggart who exaggerated his relationship with Trump and freelanced. Few witnesses directly heard the president call for a quid pro quo. Then you have to explain all of that. And, a big part of Republican overconfidence about how this is going to go is based on being very stupid.
Wow.
They think that their audience is stupid.
Yeah.
And they themselves aren't that bright either. So when the public hearings start, it'd be helpful for media at least to remember that the fact-finding by the Democrats on the one side and the BS smoke and mirrors conspiracy theories by Republicans, because that is their strategy, to bring up the conspiracy stuff. They don't have to be given equal weight. That's not a matter of fairness. It's a matter of journalism. So Brian Stelter was talking to Bill Moyers, and Moyers told Stelter, do facts matter anymore? I think they do. I think they mattered in the Watergate hearings and the Clinton hearings, and I think they'll matter this time too. I think he's talking about the Clinton impeachment hearings.
Yes.
And Harwood agrees, yes, as he retweets that. So when Jonathan Bernstein says you have to consider who the target audience is, that's all really important. For example, one of the audiences is marginal Democrats and their constituents. So the biggest disaster for Democrats would be if Republicans are united on an impeachment vote, and then after a Senate trial, Democrats end up divided. So for the most part, they've already done what they needed to do. Polls show that impeachment is almost as popular as Trump is unpopular. And there's been no apparent backlash against Democrats or surge in support for Trump over the impeachment drive. Remember, that was the worries that were driving people like Abigail Spanberger, our poster child for a moderate Democrat in the Trump district. And it turns out impeachment fears disappeared. I mean, Chuck Todd had nothing to talk about. He kept talking about, oh, what if the impeachment drives this? What if the impeachment reelects Matt Bevin in Kentucky? And we have another election coming up Saturday, which is the third of the governor races. We had Mississippi that the Republican won.
Yes.
We had Kentucky that the Democrat won. And then there's Louisiana. And we have a current Democratic governor. Early voting actually has favored him. So that's only about a third of people who vote. The other 2/3 vote on election day. So we'll see what happens. But Chuck Todd's now infamous tweet, what if Democrats lose all three and it's because of impeachment? Well, they didn't lose all three. In fact, they may even win 2 out of 3. And so what about impeachment? So those marginal Democrats and their constituents are certainly marginal, meaning they are in swing districts, maybe Trump districts. Second group of people are people like Representative Will Hurd, who's a Texas Republican, sometimes Trump opponent. He opposed formalizing the impeachment inquiry, but as you and I talked about on the show, and you with much more authority, which is to say you know what you're talking about, pointed out that procedural votes generally go party line. It's got nothing to do with the actual vote. So we don't know where Hurd is or any other Republican on actually formalizing articles of impeachment. We only know that he voted with his party on a procedure vote, which Republicans, frankly, are much better about than Democrats.
True. Yes.
Because Democrats often screw up the motion to commit, which if you don't know what that is, maybe we can remind you. But usually it's just a maneuver to try to get something not done. And Democrats sometimes fall for it, and Republicans never do.
Yeah, they're right. They set up the questions as as gotcha votes, and it happens the same way we set up gotcha votes for Republicans. Republicans just train themselves not to care. Democrats say, golly, what if this is used against me in a campaign commercial, and panic.
Right. So after Will Hurd and the people who were retiring, who were a little bit more free to speak their mind, the next tier of Republicans, removal is only possible, Bernstein points out, if the bulk of the Republican Party turns on Trump, and that would have to include a lot of people, voters and party actors, who have chosen to support Trump despite having serious reservations about him. The fact that Representative Pete King from Long Island is retiring as of this morning, he announces, maybe he can't see his way to supporting Trump anymore, even though he's hardly what the media will lovingly describe as a moderate. He's pretty racist when it comes to the wall and immigrants, so I wouldn't call him a moderate. He happens to support sensible gun laws, but that doesn't make him a moderate. And frankly, the problem with the Republican Party is that if you think Pete King is a moderate, that tells you about where the rest of the party is. Well, anyway,
good point.
We can't really know how many of these people exist, although stories often circulate about members of Congress who support Trump in public but criticize him off the record. It's always hard to tell how seriously to take such things. Never Trumpers are really good at telling you that. But, what it means in terms of voting, well, we don't know yet because we know about procedural votes and how they should go and will go, and we don't know about the real thing. So, again, I think the cynics are wrong. I think facts matter, and that's all part of this public hearing. So the next group of people that are targets for the public hearings are the neutral media. By neutral, he means the major networks and newspapers that generally don't act as messengers for either party. Democrats want to keep them focused on what Trump did and why it was so inappropriate that he should be removed. Republicans don't appear to be rebutting those claims as much as complaining about procedure and attempting to put Democrats, including Biden, on trial. Most voters won't tune into the hearings, but many will absorb something from the coverage, and that includes how the media signals which stories are important. So again, we've learned that adults get their news by reading headlines from various sources, even when they never turn to the article themselves. So if it's during the day and they're working and they're not watching the hearings, they need to be prepared for what to get on the nightly news, and you can't be both sides about this, which is my original comment. You can't just say, oh, well, Ukraine was really trying to interfere with the 2016 election and give that the same weight as here are Bill Taylor and Fiona Hill and George Kent and a whole bunch of professionals who are sitting here telling you that Trump wanted to extort the Ukrainian president, and there's pretty much proof because they heard him do it. And by the way, the money was held up, and the only reason he got the money isn't because Trump said, oh, there's no quid pro quo because they got the money. What are you talking about? It turns out that John Bolton, State Department and Department of Defense release the money in contradiction to what Trump wanted to do. And the timing of all of this is such that his statements about I had nothing to do with it really have everything to do with it. So how the media covers that will be important. And, you know, frankly, how it's presented to the media, what kind of story the Democrats tell will be important as well. And that's why it's so important to have these public hearings. And we'll know the answer to that in just a couple of days. And then, of course, we have partisan Democrats, so they already know what they think about all of this. So Bernstein concludes, pay attention to the demeanor and style in which Committee Chair Adam Schiff and other Democrats conduct the hearings. You'll learn pretty quickly whether they think there's a real chance of removing Trump or if they think of the process mainly as a part of the 2020 campaign. Right? If they're serious about it and they look, you know, weary and world weary and in sorrow, not anger, they think that he is going to be possibly convicted. And if they act like, oh, well, it's all going to be a show, let's do a Jim Jordan thing, make a lot of noise and Matt Gaetz and pound the table and get everybody to look, then they think it's for the 2020 election.
Interesting. I guess, well, with those guys, that might well be true. I think it would be the opposite with me. If I thought that there was a chance that we would be presenting all this evidence that he should be impeached and thought, though, that Republicans would simply ignore it and he wouldn't be impeached, I think my trial would look more like ranting and raving. I'd have to work really hard to make it sober and serious.
So here's what some polls and new polling tells us about this. This is from Ezra Klein and Vox. Poll, 65% of Republicans say Trump's Ukrainian scheme was normal presidential behavior. And you may look at that and say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. The Republicans absolutely refuse the budget. Actually, that means 35% are at least going to give it a listen.
That's the other side of the number.
And that's a lot. You know, we're talking about, some polls are showing that Trump support among Republicans are down in the 70s when it was in the high 80s and even to 90. Yeah. So those things on the margin matter. Anyway, as part of our podcast, Klein writes, Ezra Klein, Impeachment Explained, Vox partnered with Perry Undem and Ipsos on a poll exploring Americans' belief about when presidential behavior is impeachable. Okay, so the baseline's here. If Republicans are trying to convince you that it's all fake news and it's a witch hunt and it's unconstitutional, which is some of the stuff they've tried to market but nobody's buying. Yes. Americans believe in the impeachment power, says this article. 71% say we need a way to remove a politician who breaks the law or abuses power from office. Sure. And that includes 83% of Democrats, 69% of independents, who to me is that important target group that Jonathan Bernstein didn't mention. And this is important, 61% of Republicans. So if Trump is trying to convince people that impeachment is ridiculous, you should never do it, he's failed.
Okay.
That's a consensus. If the president broke the law or abused power, impeachment's merited.
Yes, generic president.
All right, well, that's important because he hasn't eroded that norm. Then we drill deeper. What counts as a high crime or misdemeanor? Trump lies often. Does dishonesty count? Surprisingly, majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and independents say it should. Okay. Remember, Clinton was impeached for lying about what he did. I do remember this. Not what he did. Lying about what he did. Yeah. Right? Do you consider the following to be a high crime or misdemeanor? Dishonesty to the American people. Overall, Republicans, yes, 50. No, 44. Republicans. Democrats is 74-23. Independents, 56-38. How about abusing the powers of the office for political gain? Okay, 67% of Republicans say that's wrong. Okay. 93% of Democrats, 75% of independents. Okay, how about abusing the power of your office to enrich yourself? 82% of Republicans say that's wrong.
They just don't think he did it, but yeah, okay.
Exactly, that's the point. It's not that he's eroded the idea of I could do this and it doesn't matter. It's all good. It's that I have convinced you I haven't done this. That's why when facts come out, they actually have the potential to be rather bombshelly, even though you and I know what they're going to show.
Yes. I guess that's it has to be considered that way. I mean, I have a feeling that I don't think he did it. Attitudes by Republicans are just, they translate into, I don't think that fact is a fact. But yes, it is interesting to note that at bottom, if they weren't, convinced that they had a partisan interest in this president, they would ordinarily say that's an impeachable offense.
Right. So you'd think that everybody's agreed on this.
Sure.
So then you get specific. Do you think the president of the United States pressuring another country to investigate a political rival is a high crime and misdemeanor? Is it just morally wrong? Is it politics as usual? 51% of Americans say it's a high crime and misdemeanor, which is, by the way, right now, about the percentage that think Trump should be impeached and removed. And that's 70% of Democrats, 52% of independents, and 22% of Republicans. So Republicans are not convinced that pressuring Ukraine is bad. That's why how you tell the story has to be done properly.
Okay.
In addition to just laying out the facts.
Please do it properly.
Okay. 65% say it's morally wrong, and that's huge majorities of Democrats and independents. And something presidents do all the time. Republicans say yes, Democrats say no, independents say no. Independents say no 48 to 37. And 24% of Republicans say, no, that's not something that presidents do all the time. So there's a quarter to maybe 30% of Republicans that can be approached with an open mind, and then 2/3 of Republicans can't be. But you lose elections when you've lost the independents as well as the vast majority of Democrats. And if you're going to carve out another 30% of Republicans and lose them too, that's a landslide. So the numbers are interesting, and it does not suggest that, oh, well, none of this will matter. You know, YOLO, nothing matters. Not true. Not true. And so the level of cynicism that they're trying to push on this is forget about it. It doesn't really make any difference. It makes a huge difference, and you have to play this through, and good for Democrats for not buying into that nonsense.
All right. You know, I just had an interesting thought. I guess this would be like one of those weird, I don't know if you could poll to find it out, but you know how occasionally people are coming up with weird explanations for why people vote the way they do, and there are many. But I was wondering if there would be Republicans who fit into that category of the 22 or so percent who say, no, this is impeachable and wrong, and he should be removed from office, who faced with an election, let's say he's still in office and nominated and on the ticket, November 2020 comes around. I wonder whether there's an effect there where people say, well, I believe he should be removed and impeached, but he hasn't been. And, look, the basic fact is they're not going to remove him. So I'm or I think he'll be overwhelmingly defeated in a landslide. So I'll just cast my vote for him because what the hell? He's going to lose anyway. It's not going to make any difference. I'm not voting for the Democrats.
There's a big country with 130 some odd million people. So I'm sure somebody thinks that way. But there's going to be a lot more people who say, you know what? They didn't remove him. I think it's my job. I have to do it.
That's true. Could be. That diner apparently not of any interest to anyone so far. But maybe we'll get that story eventually. But instead, I'm wondering if we'll end up getting, we need to talk to voters in the heartland who lost faith. We're not going to get unanimous Republican consent on this, no matter what we do, even though it's obvious. But again, Nixon had 24% at the time he left, and everybody knew it was wrong. Yes. Even though they didn't know who the whistleblower was.
Is what they said at the time. That's a quote. I forget who. Earl Landgrebe or somebody said, don't bother me with facts. I'm voting to support Nixon.
There you go.
No matter what. And then that was like a few hours before he resigned.
He didn't even get that chance to cast that vote.
Exactly. So a different pollster from NPR. So we'll finish out a first segment with this.
Right.
NPR asked Lee Miringoff from Marist, so what's going on here with this impeachment stuff? And he says, well,
sure.
We have a lot of different opinions right now which haven't crystallized. So some people think it's been a distraction from more important issues. That's a presidential campaign going on, and that itself shows an unusually high level of interest on Democratic and Republican sides. So people do get the impression that elections matter. And so if government doesn't help you and everybody's bad and the government is like the Department of Motor Vehicles and everybody hates them, if that's the Republican message, you have to also contrast that with the idea that they'd also like you to believe that elections don't matter. Our people will vote. You guys don't have to. It won't make any difference. That's failed because interest is incredibly high and people are really angry about what's going on here. So we have that background. And so Miringoff says right now we have sort of this whole impeachment talk, which is distracting from that. And I think also, and some of your folks that you interviewed alluded to this, has been pretty much behind closed doors interviews. So the public's only kind of getting the political spin on the evening news. They're seeing some Democrats come out and say it's horrible, Republicans calling it a hoax. So they're getting a lot of spin, but they're not getting the actual substance. And I think there's some other element to this, which is kind of like, it's sort of like a whodunit, except the public kind of has a hunch where all this ends up and what the answer is. So there's no real intrigue. It's not a page turner. So I think there's a lot of different attitudes which haven't really crystallized, and that may change when the investigation goes public, which, by the way, is Wednesday. I was going to ask about that, says NPR, because the House is set to open hearings this coming week. Do we have any sense of what effect that may have on the public's attitude? And Marengoff, the pollster, says, I think it may actually change it. I think it's, going to provide a more visual component. I think everybody goes back to Watergate and discussing this. And if you do go back to where it took the hearings that were public and open to galvanize the interest, slowly, it just doesn't happen overnight. We know how it started. We know how it ended. And history suggests maybe it went a little quicker than we think, but actually it didn't. It takes time.
But it suggests it.
Right. So
it's a good suggestion.
His opinion is that, again, these hearings will matter. Now, he points out those Republicans, or the interviewer says, the Republicans have been willing to speak, have said they just don't think it matters. It's not that serious.
Okay.
But you have so many cross currents going on. You have, for example, John Bolton and his deputy suing to have clarification from the courts as to whether or not they should testify, even though Bolton keeps saying, I have a lot to say. I have a lot that's going on. You really want to talk to me.
Yeah.
And while this is going on, Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, who's right in the middle of this, who is the one who wouldn't authorize the money, joined the suit.
Right, or
and Bolton
try.
and his group are saying, we don't want you on this suit. What are you doing?
Oh, that's interesting.
That happened this morning.
They don't have to let him.
This is an unfriendly, what are you doing here? So Republicans are in a bit of disarray.
Oh,
and
my
it's
God.
not clear what Mulvaney's doing.
All right. Well, yeah, he's not automatically entitled to join the suit.
No, and so the point is their defense is all over the place, and they really don't have a coherent story, whereas the Democrats do. And that's why the hearings will be compelling.
Nice change. All right, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see, we return with Craig Dworkin as soon as things are settled there in the stonemason and dog care background. We are multitasking, as always.
Right, Abby's outside now.
Okay,
so.
We used our break for that. Perfect.
Yes.
Well timed, Abby.
So here's the story I was referring to in the Washington Post. Mulvaney's move to join impeachment testimony rankles Bolton allies.
Rankle.
White House acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney's last-minute effort to join a lawsuit that could determine whether senior administration officials testify in the impeachment inquiry was an unwelcome surprise to former top national security aides, highlighting internal divisions among President Trump's advisors in the face of the probe. And again, the cynics will say none of this matters, but the pressure put on the ordinary people who have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawsuits on this to help defend themselves is enormous. And the lower down the chain you go, the less wealthy they've had a chance to become under Trump, even though they're trying to steal money left and right. And they don't have the resources to do this, and so they tend to crack.
Yes.
Former National Security Advisor John Bolton's advisors and allies were taken aback to learn late Friday that Mulvaney had gone to court seeking to join a separation of powers lawsuit, according to people familiar with their views, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the ongoing inquiry. So they, I guess, spoke to Bolton's mustache behind the scenes. The suit was filed by Bolton's former deputy, Charles Kupperman, who was asking a federal judge to determine whether a congressional subpoena takes precedence over a White House order. Bolton's willing to testify if the judge rules in favor of the House, the Washington Post previously reported. So you have a situation where nobody's really totally understanding why Mulvaney's doing this. I presume it's just a delay, deflect,
certainly
sort of thing.
Would help. Yes. I mean, he's got to claim something for not showing up.
The story says they believe Mulvaney's goal is to avoid testifying by joining a suit involving officials whose attorneys argue they may be limited in what they can do.
Yes. Right?
So I think he's trying to be shielded from having to obey his legal duty to comply with valid subpoenas. But then get your own lawsuit.
Yeah, I'm sure that's part of it, too.
It's cold out. I would like a roof over my house. I'll just move into your house.
Yeah, I'll just take
Who
this one.
Who asked you?
Right. Your claims aren't the same, for one thing, but yeah, for another, maybe what he could do is he could go to the store and get one of those, Groucho Marx glasses with the mustache and color it white and just show up and say he's Bolton.
Yeah.
Defend me, Mr. Lawyer guy. I forgot your name.
I'm John Bolton. Get over it.
Hello, my name is John Bolton. I believe you have a defense for me.
Yes.
So it might work, but I guess he's likely making some of the same claims, and it is entirely possible that he doesn't want to.
Is not currently
That's
working.
true.
So there's a lot of big differences there.
Yeah.
So while all this is going on, by the way, in the background, just to let you know that everybody's a crook in that administration, AP reports this morning 2 political supporters of U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry secured a potentially lucrative oil and gas exploration deal from the Ukrainian government soon after Perry proposed one of the men as an advisor to the country's new president.
What? Wow.
So what that has to do with anything, basically any claim that Trump makes, whether it's about the Clinton Foundation or whether it's about Hunter Biden, basically they're doing it.
Yes, that's true. This is an obvious, the reveal of the projection that you knew was somewhere in this story is right here. The, oh wow. Are you being bulldozed?
No, they're putting stone dust down, and now they're using these large sweepers to kind of compact it, and it happens to be right outside the window.
That's cool. All right,
maybe a shorter segment than normal.
Yeah, it sounds like Morse code.
That rumbling in the background is West Virginia falling into the ocean.
Okay, well we'll just talk right over it, I think. But yeah, as it turns out, everything that they accused Hunter Biden of, basically at bottom, we found out what we thought we were going to find out when we learned about Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman having started among the many businesses that they have, including fraud guarantee and a possible marijuana business, which also comes up in the news again later. But getting into the gas business in Ukraine, what they were really interested in doing was displacing American Democrats who were profiting in the Ukrainian gas sector with American Republicans who could take those profits instead. And the one way you could convince the business sector and governmental sector in Ukraine to do that, because they're not going to upset the apple cart working well with incumbent people making money, is you say, well, here's what you do. Call them corrupt and bounce them for corruption and then put our guys in there. Now, I'm not saying our guys will be less corrupt, but I am saying you will make friends in the current administration if you do this, which is also a quid pro quo. Same one. So very interesting story, interesting development. I wonder whether we're going to see the American press really treat it that way or not. They certainly have an inkling, I would say, in reporting this.
Right. And again, it's interesting because a lot of the Trump loyalists in Congress are lawyers, and it's very difficult. John Neely Kennedy, to distinguish him from John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Senator Kennedy has a interesting way of trying to avoid the whole thing altogether by blowing smoke, but some of the smarter lawyers realize that actually Trump is proclaiming that he didn't do anything.
Yes.
And not that, he did something, but it's not that bad. He declared on Twitter he didn't do anything. So he's basically forcing the Republicans to defend every single thing that he does. And the problem with that is that what he did is actually, they realize, not defensible. So they have to make the argument he didn't do it.
Yes, they're stuck with that one.
And that's why, again, the public hearings are so important. So that's really the situation now, and the whole week is going to be watching this. So everything else is kind of a sideshow as far as that goes. Everything's going to be on hold until the big hearings, and the big hearings are going to matter, is my opinion, and that's what the polls say. Now, something else that I think is worth mentioning before I go this morning,
Yes.
and that is some rare insight by media about how they're covering the Democratic primary. This is from John Harris over at Politico.
Okay.
He's one of the co-founders of Politico.
Oh.
And I think he's still executive editor. He's founding editor. I don't know what he does there now.
Yeah,
but one big thing about the
Yeah.
Dems that they get, one big thing the Democrats get wrong about Warren.
Okay.
Okay. And it's not that she has a dangerous lurch to the left, as many of the centrist Democrats, moderate to center-right Democrats, the donors, and so on and so forth, the Biden camp would like you to believe, because that way Biden's in a stronger position. The fact is, the political establishment loves the center, and it's the radicals who wind up writing history. And so people need to pay attention to that. Harris makes the case, and he says, it's awkward to admit, would you want a loved one to date a Democratic operative? But what the cynics and hacks and bedwetters say makes actually a lot of sense to me, he says. With the stakes so high in 2020, why wouldn't Democrats play it safe? With Trump becoming more divisive by the day in positions and rhetoric, why wouldn't Democrats run as uniters? Why not try to own the center? Now, there are strong answers to those why not questions, but the questions themselves are irrelevant. See, the right has been fulminating for decades about liberal bias in the media, and the left, including Bernie Sanders, has invaded against capitalist bias caused by corporate ownership of news organizations. But he says that's not really what's going on. A quarter century covering national politics has convinced me, John Harris, that the more pervasive force shaping coverage of Washington is what might be thought of as centrist bias, flowing from reporters and sources alike. It's a headwind for Warren, Sanders, the squad, even for Trump. The bias is marked by an instinctual suspicion of anything suggesting ideological zealotry, an admiration for difference splitting, a conviction that politics should be a tidier and more rational process than it usually is. And he says, myself, John Harris, I got it. I got a pretty strong bout of that. I'm not terribly self-conscious about my predispositions to see politics and governance a certain way. That's why the deficit peacocks always get so much positive coverage, by the way. Okay, but here's the main reason why it might be wrong. The most consequential history is not usually driven by the center. Okay? As Bill Clinton began his second term before the eruption of the sex scandal, he spoke frequently of his desire to be a national unifier and, quoting scripture, a repairer of the breach. Now, one skeptic was the great 20th century historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who knew and liked Clinton but was deeply wary of middle-of-the-road politics. Great presidents, he said, are unifiers mostly in retrospect. In their own times, they divide the country over large questions, slavery, civil rights, the proper role of government versus the private sector, and only later unite the country at a new level of understanding. So it's pretty clear that Warren, who's so far run the most disruptive and effective campaign of the Democratic race, is ready to divide the country and her party over the proposition that a much more aggressive role for government's needed to bring business to heel and protect individuals. And the global climate, by the way, from the predations of a free market. Sanders has won a core of devoted backers animated by the same disdain for centrism. And after a dozen years as Politico editor-in-chief, I've shaken off that title in daily management to take on a new column. We're calling it Altitude. That's his new column. And his column is going to be about, you know, how things really need to be looked at in terms of what the disruptors are doing.
Okay.
Now, people who don't share my centrist disposition do not have a death wish. They just have a different idea of how a new governing order comes to life. So that's, you know, for a centrist political writer, and hack, he's this guy. He's pretty, you know, pretty good insight into what's going on with his own writing and his own biases.
Okay, well, there. Yes.
So you know, obviously Warren has to be portrayed as out of the mainstream because my mainstream views are obviously the acceptable place everybody ought to be starting with.
Oh yes.
Say most reporters.
Right.
as they cover this.
But he
What
says
about the fact that
most
she's really
reporters say that.
popular and she's beating Trump? Well, obviously, extremists can't win, so we better include that in the story. So let's talk about electability because it's code.
Okay, well, that explains it. I mean, I don't know if it fixes it, but it gives you a key to explaining it.
Right. So, when you
In
look at
their
it that
minds.
way, it's like, okay, fine, just vote for who you want to. Don't worry about electability. That's the biases of the people who are writing. The same biases, by the way, somebody else pointed out, I forget who, apply to Joe Biden.
All right.
Why is Biden in
Yes.
trouble, even though he's leading all the polls and he seems to still be there? Well, you can look at the technical reasons, like he's running out of money. His path in Iowa seems defined as to lose. How do you win South Carolina when you've already lost Iowa, New Hampshire? Those are the technical aspects of why you think Biden might be shaky. But the other side of it is that 28 to 39-year-old reporters don't get why Biden is popular, and so they keep writing about it.
Well, okay. That's another bias.
Right. I mean, so I enjoy when the media actually covers some of the same biases, and we're more than happy to point out to them that they generally ignore us about.
Yeah, although, well, that gives us things to do. Read
Chuck
their...
God.
Yes. And we can read all about their biases. All right.
Right? I don't want to talk about impeachment and the facts. Let's just talk about how does it play with Republicans. Here's two Republicans to talk about it.
Well, here's how to play with Republicans. I'm going to
Just
sit
as
here and
Jonathan
play with
Breslin
Republicans.
talked about who his constituency is, that's Chuck Collins. So,
All right.
how is this all playing in the background? This is Ron Brownstein in Atlantic. The
what
suburban
that is?
backlash against the GOP is growing. This is from the Pundit Roundup. Donald Trump's strategy of revving up his rural base may not be worth the cost. That's just another fancy way of saying his base alone isn't big enough to win with.
Okay.
And then conservative Josh Krashauer writing in National Journal, Democrats rocking the suburbs if Republicans can't cut their losses, their outlook for 2020 becomes grim. Now, this is all based on last Tuesday's election results with Kentucky and particularly the suburbs closest to Cincinnati and Virginia in terms of Northern Virginia and how blue it's gotten.
Yes.
Including Loudoun County.
That's right.
So all of that is background for, you could say what you wanted, but the fact of the matter is that the suburbs are trending blue, and that's a big deal because that has major ramifications for the 2020 election. So between the impeachment, public hearings, Trump's bad poll numbers, election results from last Tuesday, I still scratch my head at people. I understand that he can win. I get that. But I scratch my head at people who say, well, but he's the front runner. No, he's not. He's actually in pretty bad shape right now.
Yes. Well, yeah, that I just assume is people who are
that's
guarding
bias
themselves.
because, the presidents always win because that's like the status
Well, I
quo.
guess that's true. They could be
Let's
doing
defend
that
the
as well.
status quo. This is what we already know.
I was thinking in terms of people who are trying to protect themselves from disappointment, but who hope that he won't win, but say it just in
No,
case.
that I get from activists, but when
Yes.
the reporters are saying
reporters
that's
are a
not
different
what's
story.
going on there.
Yeah, that would be really something if the reporters are. It doesn't even matter. News. Why am I doing this?
And I'm going to finish with one, I think, really interesting article. It was in the Bulwark, so remember, it's a conservative source.
Okay.
And I'll again, remind you that when conservatives write up stuff, they generally throw in some conservative red meat, partially because they believe it and partially because they'll lose their audience if they don't.
Okay.
So Christian Schneider is writing, Republicans need a witch hunt even if they have to manufacture one. It explains a little bit about the Jim Jordan strategy here. Right? And he's going to talk a little bit about the Clinton impeachment, which will get progressives annoyed because they'll think he mischaracterizes it. But promise you, that's not the point. The point is how they're approaching.
Okay.
This-
He does do it, but it's not the point.
After 18 boxes of evidence supporting the Starr report were delivered to Congress in early September 1998, both Republican and Democratic lawyers began poring over the documents. A congressional staff attorney started redacting Social Security numbers, embarrassing sexual details, information about White House intern Monica Lewinsky's weight problems. But as New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker described in his timely book, The Breach, Democratic lawyer Julian Epstein was just starting to worry. Because in the process of suggesting redactions, Democrats and Republicans were agreeing on too much.
Okay.
Baker said the whole premise governing the Democratic strategy was to paint the Republicans as unfair, to make a case they were being partisan. So the Democrats went through the documents again, looking for lurid details to redact that they thought Republicans would reject in an effort to create conflict. And sure enough, Democrats moved to redact the detail about Bill Clinton's famous use of a cigar. Republicans argued this incident was proof Clinton had lied. They opposed the redaction, and thus the GOP fell right into the Democrats' trap. They voted to keep lurid details in the materials to be released, and the Democrats had their hook for the 1998 midterm elections, in which they argued the Republicans were deranged, power-hungry perverts, and it worked.
Okay.
Right? So that was the strategy there. 21 years later, party line partisanship surrounding an impeachment is again electoral strategy. When the House of Representatives voted last week to begin a formal impeachment inquiry, not a single Republican voted with the Democratic majority. Again, he gets it wrong too. Nobody seems to understand this. It was a procedural vote. It doesn't matter. But in any normal judicial proceeding, the facts of the case would drive the process. And just as Democrats did in 1998, Republicans are now trying to use the process to create a narrative. The Democrats are running a partisan witch hunt to burn their cherubic and innocent president at the stake.
Yes.
Right? Look at those cheeks. Look how cute Trump is. Don't you want to just scratch behind the ears, just like the bear I had on my back? No, that's not really it. But that's the picture they're trying to paint.
Okay.
And just like with the bear, don't do that.
Yeah.
Given the overwhelming evidence that Trump withheld aid to Ukraine in an attempt to extort political dirt on Joe Biden, manufacture, but I like the word that at least they used extort.
Yes.
It's unbelievable that even a few conscientious Republicans wouldn't wander off the reservation. That's a term that we've retired.
Right.
To back a formal inquiry, at least, even if they couldn't go the full hog on voting for articles of impeachment. But without the facts on its side, GOP seems to have realized its only play is to scramble the process in an attempt to create a fact they can lean on. And pitching impeachment as a strictly partisan endeavor is a manufactured fact Republicans think might work. Now, the downside to this strategy, aside from the fact that it's dishonorable and corrodes public trust in political life, is that it's not clear it can work when the public's actually in favor of impeachment. Impeachment remove is already over 50%. If the public wants Trump removed, and the only thing holding the caucus together is the idea of total solidarity, it may take only a few senators to turn on Trump for the dynamic to change and quickly. That's why I think the whole idea that, it's foregone that Trump will, skate through impeachment in the Senate. I don't think that's true. But I think we don't know. Could work out that way, but we don't know that. Once the partisan process foundation's gone, the entire building falls, and that's a dynamic that sometimes happens in politics. For example, take Nikki Haley's position on removing the Confederate flag from South Carolina government buildings. Republicans were against it, and then she took that position, and all of a sudden other Republicans were okay with it.
Yes, okay.
And then suddenly conservatives began nodding and saying, yeah, that sounds right. And anybody following that would have said, that's never going to happen. It happened.
I bet that's true. All right. Yeah, I like that example. That's a good one.
So, of course, an unfair partisan process helps Republicans, like the Democrats in 98. The rallying cry of partisan witch hunt is the only thing GOP has going for them. Now, the point of all of that is that if you want to understand why Jim Jordan takes his coat off, jumps at the table, acts like, a complete clown and yells and screams at the cameras, this is why.
Okay.
Right? Because this gets covered on Fox News as it's a partisan process. Look at our guys trying to fight for you. But that doesn't have staying power. The facts are so strong in this case. And again, with public hearings coming up, that's why I don't think it's a sustainable strategy. But that's what they're doing. So if you want to understand why are they doing this, now you know. But you have that, contrasted, for example, with the lawyers like Lindsey Graham saying there's no quid pro quo because it would be wrong if there were, but I'm just telling you that didn't happen. And the facts saying it happened.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see that play out. I happened to notice as you were describing this and hearkening back to the Clinton impeachment, Marcos tweeting out, I guess in reaction to, everyone's reacting to Trump's tweets, I guess, from last night, reiterating that the call to the Ukrainian president was perfect, there's nothing wrong. A lot of interesting analysis.
And don't you even say it was wrong.
Right. And so I just saw Mark Sumner analyzing it and saying this is really super dangerous. He's painting all Republicans into the corner where you cannot admit that there was any fault here, and that's going to be their undoing. But Marcos referencing the Clinton impeachment, saying the obvious defense was the one the Dems used with Clinton, In other words, to give your senators in particular, but everyone, room to say the behavior was wrong but not impeachable. But Trump won't allow anyone to say that anything he did was wrong. So in order to remain a loyal Republican and not come under fire from Trump himself, you got to stand there and say the opposite of what most people, according to the polls and everything else, say is, here's the survivable position in this. You say this was wrong, but it doesn't rise to that level. But I guess if you're not even allowed to do that, that leaves you with, I either have to go down with the ship or abandon. I don't know which.
And that will be the choice, and that's an incredible amount of pressure. So that's my segment for today. Sorry about the background noise with the construction and all, but
that's okay.
To me, that's what's
the
going
patio
on.
Here. You're building it there. That's right. I won't have it even. All right. Well, I'll go get some noise of my own and build something here too.
Well,
okay.
you do that.
We have no space for that. So I hope everything goes well. Thanks for coming in despite the noise. And our hearings begin when you return Wednesday, or I don't think
they're
something
going to
tomorrow.
start Wednesday, and I think they're going to start off with Bill Taylor, but I haven't seen the schedule yet.
Okay. Well, I'll take a look. We'll find out. We'll catch up with it. We'll see if there's any explosive news in between then and now, or anybody falls out of a building or eats polonium.
Yeah, or maybe Peter King will retire again.
Yeah, right. He can
I
do
just
it all
enjoy
over
it so much. I hope he does it every day for a few days.
Sure, I wouldn't mind at all. Although it is riling everybody watching. Most people in my Twitter feed are happy that he's gone, but angry at Chuck Schumer for not yelling at him and kicking him on the way out.
Yeah, well,
it's
people are going to find something to be angry about. I would rather be angry about kids in cages.
All right, that seems like a better
go.
one. Okay,
take care,
and
I will talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, very good. Thanks for hanging in there, and we'll talk to you then. Take care. Yeah, all right. So let's now. Okay. It's a lot quieter now. That's good. All right. Well, it's rough going. It's tough sledding to do that work with that noise in the background. But rather than leave you hanging without a news roundup, he's come through for us, and I appreciate it. All right. Let's see. I can't decide whether to jump right back to where I was before, or maybe what we'll do is we'll fill in some of the blanks in this. Oh, let's see. There's interesting. I got a note here from our good friend Gideon over in the UK. He says, you might like this, and I'm worried about what this might be. A New York Post article. It says, Jets versus Giants prediction line, take the underdog. I'm a little worried about looking at it because I am, nominally a Giants fan. I mean, I really am. I've been a long time Giants fan. It's not fair to say nominally just because they're doing poorly. But I have taken a lot less interest in the NFL in general of late. And so I guess I'm beginning to question my commitment to all of it. I didn't watch the game. I haven't watched Giants games in a while. I just have too many other things going on. And of course, there's the low motivation factor there. But anyway, yeah, I hate when the Jets play the Giants. It's a rarity, and usually the Jets are worse than the Giants by far, even when the Giants are really bad. But when they play one another, bad things happen, and the Jets tend to come away with a win when the Giants are down, and it's really embarrassing and annoying. So I don't know. We'll take a look at that perhaps off the air. But just thanks very much, Gideon, for keeping us up on something other than the obsessive coverage of what's happening in the impeachment hearings and the surrounding environs, if you will. All right, well, I'm going to mark that one for later. So let's see. On the agenda, and I guess since we're coming up to the break, we'll come back to the story that developed over the weekend based on that related to the character introduction that we made on Friday of Charles, Gucciardo, and clear that up and give you a reminder of what that was about if you weren't listening on Friday, and tell you where it went over the weekend. But I do want to, I guess we'll use the minute or two before the break to jump back to that AP reporting about Perry and his allies ending up in a position of prominence in the natural gas markets in Ukraine. This is something that I think I was pretty clear about back in, I guess, late September when the whistleblower report was first publicly acknowledged. And within a few days, I think by early October, it had become clear to me that it was likely to turn into a story of Parnas and Fruman basically trading their willingness to fan the flames of the conspiracy theory fantasy that there was interference in the 2016 elections that originated in Ukraine and not among Kremlin loyalists in the Ukraine. That doesn't count. And but that this was ultimately about Fruman and Parnas getting competitors out of the way in the Ukrainian natural gas market so that they could fill the vacuum and make a profit. As it turns out, others were running a similar game, and I guess that's why Rick Perry was so interested in playing along here. But yeah, I guess you should be questioning right from the beginning. If the issue in Ukraine is corruption, I mean, I guess you could make an excuse for it. If the issue is corruption, why the prominent role for the energy secretary? Of course, I guess the argument would be, well, we think that the corruption is chiefly in the energy sector. And that might be true because that's where the big money is. But it's a little unseemly now to have come out of it having been all about pushing your own people. So we'll see whether this develops into something major or not. After push from Perry, backers got huge gas deal in Ukraine. That's the headline of the AP piece. Desmond Butler, Michael Basiker, Stephen Brown, and Richard Lardner, the writers on this. It just came out about an hour ago. I saw it was most widely, I think, retweeted by Robert Costa. So interesting that he's got an eye on this. And, well, we'll return to it after the break, but just to give you a teaser of it while we have the music rolling. Two political supporters of U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry secured potentially lucrative oil and gas exploration deal from the Ukrainian government soon after Perry proposed one of the men as an advisor to the country's new president. Interesting that would even be on the table, of course. Why would the Ukrainian president need help in trying to choose advisors? Well, he probably doesn't. Unless, of course, you want to set that guy up to give you a giant profit later. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see, I'm just reacting to something I was watching over Twitter. Let's see. So I'm watching the stories go by of Donald Trump Jr. walking out on his own book event. I think that's kind of funny, especially, of course, the fact that I guess he's upset by jeers at the event, not from left-wing protesters, but I guess the members of the fan club who have gathered. Let's see, somewhere I think I've actually put aside the story of this thing, thinking we would get to it later, and I guess we'll just push it. We'll give the short version of it, and then see if we can't find the story of it. But by now you've probably heard the story. So he's doing a book event for his new book, which is, I don't know what I don't know what's in it. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. His father read it and said it was good, but I don't think that he reads anything, and he's not really a book critic I would trust necessarily. But I think what's funny is you may know by now that his book is titled, Triggered, right? As he's making fun of what he believes is his and other right-wingers' ability to upset liberals at will, by triggering them, by doing things that'll make them angry, and then saying, triggered much? And of course, so he's essentially capitalizing on right-wing troll culture and writing a book about how easy it was to trigger all the libs, and we love to own the libs, et cetera, et cetera. And then he gets triggered himself. He leaves his own book event for the book entitled Triggered because he's been triggered. I think that's amazing. What an incredible cell phone, as Paige, our old friend Plutonium Paige, points out on Twitter this morning. That's really kind of incredible. that he would even let that happen. And I guess I understand from the reporting that I read briefly. So he's there and he's doing a book event and he's going to give a speech and leave. And when it was announced that there was going to be no question and answer period, the right-wing fanboys who had showed up for that purpose, I guess they were really interested in a Q&A session, which, I don't really know why, but there you go. Anyway, so they announced that he's not going to do a question and answer period, and people started getting upset about that. And for some reason, they go to their go-to chant, which I think is sort of hilarious, and they may even think is hilarious too. They just start going into a USA chant. USA, USA. So something's clearly wrong. They can't articulate it, so they chant USA. And then somebody comes up with, I think, a clever substitute and starts chanting Q&A, Q&A, Q&A. All right, that's kind of funny. Apparently, that upsets his girlfriend, Kim Guilfoyle, to no end, and she stands up and lectures them about, you wouldn't be making your parents proud by being rude and inconsiderate, and then they just left. I just think that's incredible. That they got triggered out of their own book event is amazing, but it's doubly amazing that the name of the book is Triggered, making fun of how triggered libs are and how they totally own them every time, and then he has to walk out of his own event. I don't even know. There's no way of, you can't embellish on that, I guess. So I won't. We'll move back instead to the story of what Rick Perry turns out to have been after in all of this Ukraine business. So we left off saying, all right, he shows up and he hands the new Ukrainian president a list of people that here's some people you could use as advisors in the natural gas market. Now, to the extent that there's huge amounts of corruption in Ukraine, and to the extent that it centers around the gas markets because that's where the bulk of the money is, that's where the corrupt officials and people looking to become corrupt officials will go in search of the money. You rob banks because that's where the money is. But I don't think that the new president of Ukraine is going to have any difficulty finding people with knowledge of the gas markets. They're all drawn there. Now, whether or not he can find somebody who is, in fact, not corrupt, not just able to convince him that he's not corrupt, or, if we can even agree on what the definition of corruption is, it seems to me it would be very, very difficult to find somebody who was not only not corrupt, but who understood. I mean, you really have to understand the history of the Ukrainian gas market and Ukrainian culture in general and the relationship with the Russians, et cetera, in order to navigate that minefield correctly. I suppose it's possible that you could if you could find a non-corrupt American international natural gas magnate that you could put in place there and trust not to be corrupt, it's possible that they might be able to approach things well-intentioned but end up, screwing things up because they just don't understand the history, the culture, the relationships there. They could blunder into doing it correctly. But, I just find it enormously presumptive, but not that unique among, in America's history, just thinking, well, we have the people who can do that. And you should just take one of ours. Of course, what's really interesting about this episode to me is that, one, it demonstrates a certain American ethnocentric arrogance about being able to do these things, quote unquote, non-corruptly. But it also reveals the more likely possibility that, what we consider corrupt is perhaps A, different than what you might consider to be corrupt in Ukraine or anywhere else for that matter, and B, that really, I don't remember whether I did 1 or B or A on that one. All right, so you classify it correctly. Correct my outline afterwards. But I think the second thing, however you want to label it, is we tend to say, because this person is American and coming at it from an American perspective, it is therefore not corrupt. You know what I mean? Corruption is that stuff that you foreign people do, whereas Americans are just interested in the free market, man, and there's just no such thing as corruption, except for, well, we believe in the free market. We're not going to pick winners and losers. You remember that whole line. And, however, here's a list of winners you should pick. Wow. Okay, well, we're all familiar with that particular hypocrisy. Let's continue with this piece here. But I guess, before we do, one more thing I think is emerging from this, the theme to think about, which may not be explicitly expressed in the AP article, probably isn't, which is not only do we get to pick the winners, et cetera, and that they're therefore instantly non-corrupt, but that, maybe it is best if we just continue on here, and we'll see if the opportunity comes up to make this point later on. I apologize for the short detour here, but Perry's efforts to influence Ukraine's energy policy came earlier this year, just as President Volodymyr Zelensky's new government was seeking military aid from the United States to defend against Russian aggression, and allies of President Donald Trump were ramping up efforts to get the Ukrainians to investigate his Democratic rival, Joe Biden. Ukraine awarded the contract to Perry's supporters. This is interesting, because I don't know whether he even gets these people chosen as advisors or not, or whether they just skip that part and go directly to giving them what they want. Ukraine awarded the contract to Perry's supporters. Did Ukraine award it to Perry's supporters, or did Perry's supporters award it to Perry's supporters because they were put in a position to help, quote unquote, help Zelensky's government make this choice about who to give this contract to? And we don't even know yet what the contract is, I guess. What this potentially lucrative oil and gas exploration deal. Okay, that was mentioned in the opening paragraph. So they award this big exploration deal to Perry's supporters little more than a month after the U.S. Energy Secretary attended Zelensky's May inauguration. In a meeting during that trip, Perry handed the new president a list of people. By the way, does that sound familiar to anyone? The United States government allegedly showing up and handing a list to Ukrainian officials of, you'll remember that the accusation was that Ambassador Yanukovych handed the new prosecutor general a list of people that couldn't be touched, that America said you cannot prosecute these people. And Yanukovych says, no, fabricated outright. And even the prosecutor general who originally claimed that it had happened now claims that it didn't. But poof, all of a sudden we found out that there really was a list handed over from the American government to the Ukrainian government, and it was Rick Perry's list of people I just think might be able to help advise you poor, ignorant bastards who know nothing about natural gas, about how to deal with the natural gas business from an American perspective, which is never corrupt. I find that interesting. So now I'll return to the second point, I guess, that I was thinking of making earlier, because I don't know if it's made here. But just the idea here is that Perry actually, believe it or not, I mean, I guess it's not hard to be smarter than Donald Trump, but Perry carries out something that could easily be framed as an improper quid pro quo, but he carries it out in a way that properly makes use of the natural cover that the perceived history of corruption in the Ukrainian natural gas market makes available. The Western world has come to the conclusion that Ukraine is rife with corruption and that a lot of it is driven by the natural gas market because that's where the money is. And we're stuck with believing that that's true, given our, like Greg was discussing, our institutional preferences for certain ways of viewing things. The Western, the coalition of Western governments, the IMF, etc., had drawn the conclusion. Remember, we were discussing this when we were talking about Joe Biden's activities in attempting to get, what was the guy? The prosecutor general, now I can't remember his last name, but it begins with the SH. But that the original one that he was seeking to get dismissed. I don't know why it slips my mind, but the defense of our interest, Joe Biden's interest, the United States' interest in getting rid of this prosecutor general was that he had been adjudged by various Western governments, various coalitions of Western governments, including that coalition known as the IMF, that this guy was not doing his job in rooting out corruption. And the IMF's chief interest in this, of course, was probably that it hampers the Western interest in investment in Ukraine, in whatever sector you might be interested in investing. But as it turns out, everybody's interested in investing in the natural gas market because that's where all the money is, again. But it hampers the interest and therefore the effectiveness of Western investment there, which would be a major part of of Ukraine's own interest in westernizing and drawing itself closer to the West to break from Russia. That all is impossible so long as there's this much corruption, because people won't invest there because it's just too huge of a risk. So it's in the interest of our Western alliance here to get rid of this particular prosecutor and replace him with somebody who's better, who will really do the job. And the cover there is now, Republicans, of course, believe that this is about about Joe Biden forcing out the prosecutor because they're worried that that this guy will prosecute Burisma and implicate everybody who works there, including Hunter Biden, which would in turn implicate Joe Biden. That's the Republican hope, and it's the Republican belief that Democrats actually thought that was a danger and wanted to do something to prevent it, which I don't think is actually the case. But at any rate, the cover here is that they say, all right, well, it's actually American foreign policy to promote anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine in order to help them westernize, in order to break them from Russia and move them toward the West. So it becomes, I guess, quote unquote, legitimate United States foreign policy, for whatever reason, and however you feel about it, to help push this prosecutor general out. Now, where there becomes a problem, of course, the difference between the way that was handled and the way that Donald Trump and his designees tried to handle getting the dirt and throwing in the CrowdStrike angle on these things. They were attempting to use the corruption, Ashokan. Yes, thank you, Athena, for bringing us that name. Thanks, everybody, who are distributed, crowd-funded, crowd-produced podcast here. So Victor Shokin, was that right? Okay. So anyway, that sort of had the imprimatur of regular channels of American foreign policy and diplomacy, plus the backing of other Western governments, which is what tends to validate American foreign policy generally. Occasionally we go our own way on these things. It doesn't always look good, and it doesn't always get the agreement of the American people going along with it when we go our own way. But here with the Trump version of it, I guess, one, because he wanted dirt on Biden in particular, and two, it really made it 100% worse, I think, adding this CrowdStrike theory to it and the exoneration of Russia from interference in the 2016 elections by pinning it on Ukraine, etc. It really made it parochial. The interests were really difficult to define as in the broader American and Western interest. But Perry does a reasonably decent job of using the cover of corruption in general to say, look, we all agree that there was corruption. Remember, the IMF said so. The Western coalition said so. So what we want to do is we want to address some of that corruption by making sure that trusted people who aren't corrupt get in charge here. And we don't know any Ukrainians. So we'll recommend instead, not because we want to be able to control the natural gas markets, or not because we want to hand automatic, gigantic, oligarch-level profits to our friends and political supporters, although that's what they really wanted to do, so that money would be kicked back to them in campaign contributions. But not that we want that. But here are some good people who are totally non-corrupt, and you would be able to virtue signal, to use that new buzzword. You'd be able to signal to the United States your seriousness in fighting corruption by putting these totally non-corrupt people in positions to award these contracts to themselves, which is, of course, a big problem when you're talking about how non-corrupt they are. But never mind that, because as you know, when Americans do it, it's not corrupt. And when weird accented foreigners do it, it is corrupt, even if they do it in their own country where they're not foreigners and their accents aren't weird, because we're America and everything's weird to us. You see, but Perry does a better job covering it because he's not automatically called out instantly by the AP for having demanded a quid pro quo, which is exactly what he demanded. But he does it within bounds that reporters recognize as, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. We were only trying to fight some corruption here. And it just so happened that the best people we know for fighting corruption are the people we know and trust, which, is not all that unusual a position to take if you handle things correctly. I think that this person is trustworthy, and if I'm fighting corruption, I'm going to recommend them. Now, if it turns out that I came to the job corrupt myself, well, that's a problem. You're going to have to find that out as an outside investigator and expose me. Can you do it? Good luck. And there's great cover in having Donald Trump be your president, because almost all of it will land on his lap because everyone believes he's corrupt. Not that lots of people don't believe that Rick Perry is corrupt, but, compared to Donald Trump, it's a pretty, easy thing to duck the responsibility for it. So, okay. Let's see what the details are here and who the people are so we can keep our eye on the right folks later on. Ukraine awarded the contract to Perry's supporters a little more than a month after the U.S. Secretary attended the inauguration, right? They have the meeting. He hands them the list. Red flag on that. One of the four names on this list was his longtime political backer, Michael Blazer. I'm guessing that's the pronunciation of Bleyzer. Is that Blazer in this picture here? Who's he talking to? Perry? Yeah, but Michael Blazer, who looks like, from this angle, looks like, I don't know, I guess like what would happen to the android Data from the Star Trek Next Generation shows if he grew old and grew long gray hair, like when he played the Doctor in Independence Day, as a matter of fact. I don't know if that guy looks like that from the front, but from the side, that's what Michael Blazer looks like, just to give you some color commentary. So, a week later, Blazer and his partner Alex Cranberg submitted a bid to drill for oil and gas at a sprawling government-controlled site called Varvinska. Maybe how that's Varvynska. Varvinska. We'll call it that. But again, not really being precisely laid out here, but I guess what is happening here is we think you should fight corruption by naming an American advisor to your board that makes decisions about who gets contracts. All right, who? Michael Blazer. All right, Michael Blazer, you're on the board. All right, Michael Blazer, who's your recommendation for drilling at the Varvinska site, Mr. Total Non-Corruption? Surprisingly, Michael Blazer nominates Michael Blazer for that job. Amazing. Corruption taken care of. Corruption fixed, everybody. You can all go home and relax now. So, as it turns out, why is giving the contract to Blazer and Cranberg such a good idea for the government of Ukraine? Well, not only are you interested in fighting corruption, but you're also interested in controlling your budget, right? Everybody knows that the IMF is going to want you to keep your budget in line as well as fighting corruption. And letting Blazer and Cranberg do the drilling is great because, ready to return to the article, they offered millions of dollars less. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they were going to somehow cost the Ukrainian government less to do this drilling. But remember, they're looking for drilling rights. So they're paying the government of Ukraine, not receiving money from the government of Ukraine. They're going to pay for the rights. So obviously, the IMF is going to be concerned with your budget, and their bid has to be spectacular because they know how much money they're going to make in this deal, right? Answer, no, wrong. They offered millions of dollars less to the Ukrainian government than their only competitor for the drilling rights. There was only one person in line for the drilling rights. I don't know who that was, but in comes Michael Blazer, and now there are two, and they offer millions of dollars less to the Ukrainian government, but the Ukrainian government loves it because reasons. That's what it says. They offered millions of dollars less to the Ukrainian government than their only competitor for drilling rights, according to internal Ukrainian government documents obtained by the Associated Press. I'm sure they're all falsified, says Donald Trump. But their newly created joint venture, amazing that they came up with a brand new company, and this brand new company won the rights. That's amazing. They call their brand new venture Ukrainian Energy, although neither of them are Ukrainian, was awarded the 50-year contract because a government-appointed commission determined they had greater technical expertise and stronger financial backings, the documents show. Okay, so the Ukrainian government has to come up with an excuse for why they are giving the contract to somebody who's offering millions of dollars less than their nearest competitor, who also happens to be their only competitor. Now, there's nuance. It could be the case that their other competitor was Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, and the Ukrainian government said those guys are obviously corrupt, and they're giving us agita in a totally different angle of the same story, so we're not awarding it to them. We got to award it to somebody else. The only other competitor is these guys. We're not doing it because they're American. We're not doing it because we want Rick Perry's approval. We're doing it because they're the only other people there. Could that be it? Maybe. I don't know who the other competitor was. But the excuse, at the very least, in the documents was, well, though they're going to pay us millions of dollars less, and that's a problem, they have greater technical expertise and stronger financial backing. So, okay, that will now be the reason that we give them the contract. Perry likely had outsized influence in Ukraine. And before I go even further in this, I guess we should say, if the government-appointed commission that determined who has the better bid includes Michael Blazer on it as one of the advisors. I don't know. It's still not clear yet whether that's the case. But if that is the case, or it's full of Ukrainians who are saying, oh, my God, look what's happening on the Burisma Prosecutor General Joe Biden front. Let's just make these Americans happy already and get them out of here. Do they really think they had better technical expertise and stronger financial backing? Could be. Could be the case. Or is it just, we got to make the Americans happy on something? That could be it. Or is it the other competitor is a totally corrupt oligarch, and we got to get rid of those guys? I don't know. So, anyway, Perry likely had outsized influence in Ukraine. Testimony in the impeachment inquiry into Trump shows the energy secretary was one of three key U.S. officials who were negotiating a meeting between Trump and the Ukrainian leader, which is something they really wanted. So was it another quid pro quo? Maybe. The sequence of events suggests the Trump administration's political maneuvering in Ukraine was entwined with the big business of the energy trade. Hello, no kidding. Perry made clear during trips to Kiev that he was close to Blazer, a Ukrainian-American investor and longtime Perry supporter who lives in Houston, and Cranberg, a Republican mega-donor who provided Perry the use of a luxury corporate jet during the energy secretary's failed 2012 presidential bid. Aha! Interesting, because I know we followed his use of that jet through FlightAware, the FlightAware app, for some time. That was actually pretty interesting. Okay. Perry's spokeswoman said Wednesday that the energy secretary has championed the American energy industry all over the world, including Ukraine, which I guess is what he's supposed to be doing. What he did not do is advocate for business interests of any one individual or company, said Shaylin Hines, the press secretary for the Energy Department. However, looked at another way, what he did do is exactly that. So that makes things rather difficult. Well, he didn't advocate for the business interests of any one individual or company, except insofar as he told the Ukrainians that they should appoint the directors of this particular company to the advisory board for the new president of Ukraine, and just so happens that the new advisory board decided to award the contract to those guys. I didn't mean for that to happen. It just happened. he says. Jessica Tillipman, who teaches anti-corruption law at George Washington University, said even if Perry did seek to influence foreign officials to award contracts to his friends, it is likely not illegal. And it may not be. And this is what I guess they do, in fact, get to this after all. My gut says it's no crime, she said. It's just icky, which is another way of saying that Perry toes the line, or at least nominally toes the line, for how these quid pro quos are arranged with the cover of American foreign policy interests being served. Right? We want somebody non-corrupt. This is a person who we trust. It just so happens this person, I trust him because he gives me money. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's get through this AP article and on to some other subjects here. But yes, all right. So we get Jessica Tillipman's nominal clearance of this as being icky, but probably not illegal. Although I suppose if you dig down, if you had reason to break through the veil here a little bit and get a hold of the documentation all the way back in constructing this deal, it may be that you would find something that pointed more directly towards an illegal quid pro quo. But it's getting through that first barrier. I mean, somebody has to hand you a smoking gun in order to make it plausible to dig for the documents that say, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you appoint me to the advisory board in Ukraine, and then I'll recommend myself, and then I'll make $1 billion drilling this gas and oil, and it'll be good for you. You appoint me, and I'll give you, I don't know what the going rate is, 17%, like commission on buying airtime and for campaign commercials, whatever it is, or 19%, which was the price point for the Russian natural gas deal that Carter Page wanted a piece of. You remember that one? Okay, so I'll kick 20% of it back just to keep the numbers round and easy to do the math, right? So if I make $1 billion, 10% of it is $100 million, 20% of it is $200 million. So I will donate $200 million to super PACs and candidates and the RNC and to you and whatever you're trying to get done, your own super PAC or your own leadership PAC if you've given up finally running for president, talking about Perry. But basically the idea is I will kick some of this money back to you. You keep me a billionaire oligarch and I'll keep the money flowing to the Republican Party. How can you keep me a billionaire oligarch? Put me in position to reap this profit from Ukraine. Is it icky or is it illegal? It depends how you handle the damn thing. If you let that, in public anyway, it is probably at bottom illegal. And if that memo gets out, it becomes illegal. But if the memo stays suppressed, and it stays suppressed because you say the right things, like this is just part of our anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine, the ones approved by the IMF, approved by the West, even approved by Democrats when they sent Joe Biden on the mission to get rid of Shokin, then we're going to be fine here because you'll never have the probable cause you need to break into my email and find that memo. Get it? That's how the game is properly played. That's how you are legally corrupt in this country. Learn the rules, damn it. Zelensky's office did not respond to requests for comment. They don't want anything to do with anything. It could just be even more playing in American politics. In a statement to AP, Blazer denied that Perry helped his firm get the gas deal. Wink, wink. I believe that Secretary Perry's conversations with Ukrainian government officials, if they in fact took place, I don't even know that. One day I got a call from Ukraine, because I am, after all, Ukrainian American, and they said, come back to Ukraine and run our natural gas sector. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I won't get a haircut, but I will do that for you. Because reasons. They knew I'm famous in Ukraine. Is he? Really? Anyway, I believe Perry's conversations with Ukrainian government officials, if they in fact took place, and I'm not saying they did not play any role in Ukrainian energy winning its bid. Sure. Blazer said Tuesday. He said the process was competitive and transparent and, quote, will hopefully serve as an example of how the Ukrainian energy market can be opened for new investments. And you're willing to say that because, of course, it's not corrupt. This is me we're talking about. Plus, I'm American, and American stuff isn't corrupt. Only Ukrainian stuff is corrupt. Now, I'm Ukrainian American, but see, I'm hyphen American. So the corruption's gone. Had nothing to do with anything. It's totally comparative. And again, it could have been. There could absolutely have been circumstances, very easy to imagine circumstances, where if you accept me as a impartial arbiter of what is and isn't corrupt and who should and shouldn't get these stupid contracts. I don't have the expertise for that, but suppose you place me in charge of it. If I'm presented with Michael Blazer and whatever the guy's name is, Cranberry over here. Cranberg is his real name. I'm making fun of him. But these two guys present me with this terrible option, which nets millions of dollars less for the government, which is supposedly my interest here. But the other guys are Fruman and Parnas, or for that matter, Dmitro Firtash and Oleg Deripaska. Or, I don't know, Al Capone, or nobodies, whoever, somebody I suspect of corruption. And I said, these are my two choices. Can I write in? Do I got a write-in ballot here? No, you got to choose between one of these two. Fine, I guess these other guys then, because Parnas, they're in jail. That's not going to work. We're not in jail yet, I'm sure, when this decision is made, but there are circumstances under which I could see going with them and having to tell the press, they're not ideal, but this wasn't a corrupt deal. They didn't pay me anything. I didn't get anything out of this. If that's true. Anyway, Amy Flakne, Flakne. I hope we got that right. A lawyer for Cranberg's company, Aspect Holdings, you can all go Google that, said Wednesday that Perry and other U.S. officials supported a, quote, fair competitive process to bring foreign capital and technology to Ukraine's lagging energy sector. That was the outcome of the competitive process. I don't know how competitive it was. There were two bids. Was one Ukrainian, native Ukrainian? I'm just sort of curious. So it wasn't the process to bring foreign capital and technology. It's just that's the kind of capital and technology you had and you won. So after the fact, you say that's what the competition was about. I don't know that it was. Aspect, that is Aspect Holdings, Cranberg's company, neither sought nor, to our knowledge, received special intervention on its behalf, Flakne said. The special intervention, though, was that Perry gives Zelensky's government a list and says, there are 4 people I would like to see appointed as advisors to your president for the energy sector. And at least one of them is Michael Blazer, who happens to be Cranberg's partner. I don't know if Cranberg's name is on the list. Anyway, next up, as Trump's energy secretary, Perry has flown around the globe to push for U.S. exports of liquefied natural gas, which is what Parnas and Fruman wanted to get into, which he calls freedom gas, like he never let go of the freedom fries framing, I guess. He's made multiple trips to Ukraine and other former Soviet bloc nations where shipments of American gas and drilling technology take on strategic importance as a potential alternative to continued dependence on imports from Russia. And again, there is a fair nexus for American foreign policy. If you want to help former Soviet republics distance themselves from Russia, one of the things you'll have to do is give them energy alternatives. Those will probably be American. That's the best way to guarantee that they're not dependent on Russians, make them dependent on Americans. Is it any better for the people of Ukraine? Not an issue. We don't care about that. Our foreign policy is don't do business with Russia. That's actually the honest-to-God, legit foreign policy position of the United States for both Democrats and Republicans, and it won't get you any legal trouble. Stick with that. Ukraine has long suffered from a reputation for political corruption, particularly in its oil and gas sector. In the chaotic days following the breakup of the Soviet Union, the newly independent Ukrainian government sold off many state-owned businesses worth billions to a cadre of well-connected oligarchs who amassed immense fortunes. As Ukraine sought economic and security support from the U.S. and other Western democracies, those countries pressed it to put in place a more open and transparent process for awarding oil and gas exploration rights on state land. At the urging of Western partners, Ukraine's government created a process requiring that exploration contracts be put out to bid and awarded following review from a selection board appointed by the president's cabinet of ministers. The board recommends the winners pending final approval from the ministers. I guess we're getting into the nitty-gritty of it here. And, I guess also, by the way, if you, with all of the best intentions, headed to Ukraine following their sudden independence and said, look, in the West, the way we handle things to try to keep things on the up and up, we're not all that good at it, is the open bidding process, right? That's the Western idea of how to do things non-corruptly. And let's say it's a good idea for the sake of argument. What is also of interest is totally non-corrupt native Ukrainians who, if we assume they have no interest whatsoever in making a corrupt profit in all of this, they just want to do things on the up and up. But coming into the process here, remember, the process that's been suggested to these Ukrainians who are trying to westernize their country is the Western one, competitive bidding process. Presumably totally unfamiliar to native Ukrainian interests, corrupt, non-corrupt, corrupt, whichever. But they don't have any experience with that. So, who's going to win, wink, 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 in the totally open and transparent competitive bidding process? The Americans who know how to write, know how to respond to a request for proposals, for instance, and understand the competitive bidding process and respond accordingly, or the Ukrainians who are told, well, this is the way they do things in the West. You don't know anything about it, but you'll figure it out. Answer these questions and submit your paperwork, and we'll see what happens. And one scenario is they simply answer all the questions and submit paperwork. But Western interests know that you, yes, answer the questions and submit paperwork, but also wine and dine officials. Do a little bit of lobbying. Talk up why your proposal is better, as opposed to, it might be, what if it's the Ukrainian idea that, well, in a fair and transparent process, I put in my answers on paper, you put in your answers on paper, the officials study them and choose the best written answers. And, of course, you could be forgiven for thinking that might be the way the process works, even if you're Western. But if you are a savvy Westerner, you know that there's more to the process. It just so happens they selected this process that we're experts in because we advised them what would be a definitionally non-corrupt process according to the West and the IMF, who will give you lots of money if you do things this way. It would be the way we in the West are familiar with doing things and therefore will win, and not the way that you in Ukraine are familiar with and therefore will lose. Is that a corrupt process? Well, it's got some cultural bias, to borrow terminology from another front with which we're somewhat familiar. If the SAT tests for knowledge that's common among white kids because they deal in this world all the time, but they don't don't put things in terms that minority students living in entirely different circumstances are exposed to every day. That cultural bias means, the high scores are over here and the low scores are over there, and we're just a meritocracy. We only admit people based on merit and achievement. It just so happens that what you do in life isn't meritable, isn't merited or considered to be achievement. It's not our fault. It's not your fault. It just happens that way. You see, I think you're familiar with that story too. So back to this. Those Western partners, remember here, I guess we should read this paragraph to set things up again. At the urging of Western partners, Ukraine's government creates the process requiring exploration contracts to be put out to bid and awarded following review from a selection board appointed by the president's cabinet of ministers. The board makes a recommendation. That's where Blazer lands, I think, pending final approval from the ministers. He's not a minister. He doesn't have that going for him. Those Western partners also advised Ukraine to appoint an independent supervisory board at Naftogaz, the state-owned energy company, as a guard against corruption and self-dealing. Interesting. So maybe that's where he lands. And, that how interesting is that? So as a guard against self-dealing, we think you should put me both on the board that does the selection and the oversight board that makes sure that I am not illegally on both boards. Okay, I don't know that that's what really happened here, but they're trying to set up something that has some sort of process here. But then Perry is trying to make sure that the people who execute the process are his people. In February, the Ukrainian government opened up bidding for 9 oil and gas blocks encompassing 4,428 square miles. Ukrainian Energy, the joint venture between Blazer's investment firm, Sigma Blazer, and Cranberg's Aspect Energy, submitted a single bid for the largest block, covering 1,340 square miles. Under the contracts, the winning bidder is awarded exclusive rights to extract petroleum for up to 50 years. After the initial costs are recovered, the company and the government split the profits. So that's the terms of the contract. An internal review of the proposals by the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy and Coal Mining, obtained by the AP, show that this is Ukrainian Energy, were not the highest bidder. The only competing bidder, okay, now we're going to get some details, was another unpronounceable name, but not, I don't think, the unpronounceable company owned by Dmitro Firtash, interestingly, but another similarly unpronounceable name, Ukrgas Buvania, sorry. Anyway, it's more commonly known by the acronym UGV, Ukrainian Gas something. I don't know what that last word means, probably something descriptive, but what they do. Anyway, UGV offered more than $60 million for the first phase of this project, compared with $53 million from Blazer and Cranberg, the document shows. UGV is Ukraine's largest domestic gas producer and is a subsidiary of Naftogaz, the state-owned company where Perry sought to replace board members. He's going to replace that board too. Despite the lower upfront investment, the selection board gave the Americans higher scores for technical expertise and overall financial resources, according to the document reviewed by the AP. Of the 9 gas deals awarded on July 1st, Blazer and Cranberg's bid was the only one of the winners that didn't include the participation of a Ukrainian company. UGV won 4 of the remaining bids. So they had enough technical expertise and financial backing to win 4 out of the 9 bids, just not the 5th, apparently. 2 members of the board that helped select the winners told the AP that the process is designed to be difficult to improperly influence because it is a mix of government representatives and industry experts. Roman Opimak, a commission member who is the head of the State Service of Geology and Subsoil of Ukraine, said the government was looking for foreign investment, particularly U.S., and the board considered that as a factor. He said it's an advantage if a company is well connected in Washington, but added that he saw no indication that U.S. officials influenced the process. Entirely possible. Perry, who served 14 years as governor of Texas, has publicly championed the potential of U.S. hydraulic fracturing technology, fracking, right, to boost oil and gas production in Ukraine, and pressed for the bidding process to be opened to U.S. companies. At an energy industry roundtable in Kiev in November 2018, Perry said the potential for oil and gas development in Ukraine is staggering. Ukraine, he declared, had a chance to become the Texas of Europe. I don't think that's what they were looking for. But okay. At the same event, which was co-sponsored by the nonprofit U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, Perry plugged Cranberg's experience. What a coincidence. Both Cranberg and Blazer were in the room, along with several American and Ukrainian energy and industry officials. You know, Alex Cranberg, who has been in this business a long time, can attest to this probably as well as anyone sitting around the table, that we have the potential to change the world, Perry said, according to a transcript released by the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Oh, double corruption. Remember, they're all corrupt there. In the embassy as well. That's what Rudy Giuliani said. During the same 2018 trip, Perry had a private meeting with then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, where they discussed deepening the ties between the two countries' energy industries, according to a U.S. Embassy summary of the meeting. Poroshenko, I think both Perry and Giuliani thought they had deals with Poroshenko. His loss of the election set them off scrambling to try and reconstruct the same deals or better with Zelensky. But since he was an anti-corruption candidate, they really needed to put the screws to him. So, of course, they corrupted him immediately. Records suggest Perry has also met regularly with Blazer. Visitor logs released by the Energy Department, I guess, show that. Show requests from Blazer show him entering through VIP check-in desk in the building at least 3 times, most recently on May 8th. Less than 2 weeks later, Perry was on a plane to Kiev to attend the inauguration for Zelensky, who had defeated Poroshenko in the April election. During that trip, Perry presented his list of recommended advisors that included Blazer and remarked on their long friendship. Wink, wink. According to a person in the room who spoke on condition of anonymity, attendees left the meeting with the impression that Perry wanted to replace an American representative on the Naftagaz board with someone reputable in Republican circles, according to the person who was there. So get that American out and replace him with our American, the one who's loyal to Republican circles. Blazer said Tuesday he had been included in what was described as a brainstorming session with Energy Department officials about creating an informal group knowledgeable about Ukraine's energy industry to help develop U.S. strategy, but he had no idea his name would be forwarded to the country's new president. It says he wasn't aware about that. The article goes on at some length about his various ties in Texas and how closely he is tied to Perry. All well worth a look. And perhaps I will review that after the day is done here and come back to you with more details about that. I wanted to use the last couple minutes to get back to what we first started with. Remember learning the name on Friday of Charles Gucciardo. Is that the name? Do I have that correct? We had read the article, Giuliani Cronies Planned Fraud Guarantee Infomercials, starring Rudy. Remember that one? Rudy says he's the lawyer for Fraud Guarantee, Parnas and Fruman, one of Parnas and Fruman's many ventures. One of which I'll just throw out there. Remember that they at some point were interested in starting a recreational marijuana business in Nevada. I'll explain why that becomes relevant in a moment. Anyway, this article and the New York Times writing, both I think put together, gave us the detail that Parnas and Fruman say they're going to pay Rudy a crap ton of money, both to be their lawyer and maybe also to do these infomercials. They promised him $500,000, but they didn't have $500,000 because Fraud Guarantee didn't have any clients. Parnas and Fruman were in the business of, skimming money off of others and sending it around Ponzi scheme style. So they needed $500,000, and it ends up they got it from Charles Gucciardo. If I keep forgetting his name, it's kind of a strange one. So anyway, we find out now a little bit more about who that guy is. All we learned was he was a lawyer in Long Island, and he agreed to give Giuliani partners $250,000 in two installments of $250,000 for some reason. They tried to say it was for him. He was investing in or giving them a loan that would be convertible to stock in Fraud Guarantee later on. But Fraud Guarantee had no money in it, so that didn't seem like a very good deal. So now, Roger Sollenberger's piece in Salon from the weekend. At the end of September, he says, a journalist friend gave me Rudy Giuliani's phone number. When I called the number, he picked up on the second ring, promptly divulged previously unreported details about his collaboration with State Department officials on a quid pro quo this summer. Not exactly sure why he did that, but that's just Rudy for you. Anyway, he filed a report about that with BuzzFeed. That report was corroborated the next day in testimony and text messages from Kurt Volker. But the important part comes later. Giuliani forgot my name almost immediately, but we kept in touch. Truth is, I enjoy speaking with him. 2 days after the publication, on the evening he attended the Yankees playoff game with Alan Dershowitz, Giuliani, President Donald Trump's 75-year-old informal cybersecurity advisor, accidentally texted me what appeared to be a password. 8 characters, beginning with the name of a networking company and including a capital letter, a special character, and a number. Multiple IT experts basically confirmed it could be nothing else. Given the iPhone's messaging setup, it also was impossible to be a butt dial. He basically calls back Giuliani and says, hey, you did this thing. You sent me a password. After having verified that it couldn't possibly be a butt dial, right, Giuliani offers him the excuse, oh, that was just a butt dial. Seems pretty weird. And we never really fully resolved this and exactly what is Giuliani up to with all these technology gaffes, given that he's the technology advisor or cybersecurity advisor to Donald Trump. Well, anyway, that butt dial story or his excuse has some resonance because, of course, we read the other day about his having butt dialed another reporter and having left inadvertently, it sounds like, a message, part of which was Giuliani saying, you know, Charles would have a hard time with a fraud case because he didn't do any due diligence. This is a discussion about how are we going to get some money. We need about $100,000. How are we going to get some cash? Could get it from Charles. You know, Charles would have a hard time with a fraud case because he didn't do any due diligence. Who's Charles? At the time, it was unclear who Charles was, but our reporter here says, I might have found him. And I found him, through all things, in Giuliani's attempt to straighten up his media act. Very interesting. And I see already I have painted myself into a corner. We're not going to get to the juicy stuff here. That's a mistake, but we can spend Tuesday on that. So let me continue with a little bit of this, though. That's because in late September, Giuliani hired a communications director. This is the good stuff. The new hire, 20-year-old Liberty University online communications major, Christiane Allen. That's my best guess at what she pronounces, where she spells it Christianne with an accent mark over the E. What does that mean? I don't know. Christiane Allen. She's currently the most solid connection, believe it or not, between the work the president's private attorney was doing in Ukraine, an ongoing federal investigation into 2 of his clients, Parnas and Fruman, and a Long Island personal injury attorney who, for reasons still unclear, reportedly paid Giuliani $500,000 in 2 lump sum loans, quote-unquote loans, on behalf of a scam business in the fall of 2018. That's fraud guarantee. And so, as I thumbed through an Instagram account, Christiane Allen's, I found myself wondering why in the world Rudy Giuliani hired this woman who can't help but document everything she does, everywhere she goes, sowing circumstantial evidence across the internet that could impact impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. She's an internet, Instagram influencer, she considers herself to be. And she documents everything she does and puts it out there for the world to see, which is not a good idea. But in addition to all this, as it turns out, upon closer examination, Christiane Allen has an interesting record. She's a Turning Point USA protege, for one thing, a Liberty University student, for another, which both of which are actually automatically suspect. But she makes amazing and wild claims all over the internet, including in her LinkedIn profile and elsewhere, at being totally connected in numerous ways, serving on the Trump Victory Fund Committee, which is ordinarily for big-time Republican donors, but she's 20 years old and has no experience to speak of. But among the many things she's done in her 20 years, while being a college student as well, she's claimed to be an intern for Donald Trump during the campaign. She has claimed to have now be working for Giuliani Partners in New York as the comms director. In addition to all of that, she also spent time interning for, of all people, Charles Gucciardo. At the age of 16, a teenager from rural Virginia, for whatever reason, through whatever circumstances, moves to New York to work for a personal injury attorney on Long Island, and then from there to the campaign, and then from there to Rudy Giuliani's office as well. All very interesting, all rather remarkable achievements for a 20-year-old with no other accomplishments to her record, but she somehow has connections to every single one of the major figures in what's being unraveled in the impeachment
From Daily
hearings
Codes
right
Radio
now.
on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So we'll be exploring a little bit more of that tomorrow, and in the meantime, the news stories that we haven't had time for, Justice Putnam will pick up on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. He's got it all laid out for you here. We're going to have a good time, and there's a lot of international element to this one, too. Stay tuned. Listen in.